I really appreciated this post that Reverend Tandika made. The concept of white privilege was created to hide white suffering. The story begins 400 years ago when bedraggled and penniless English laborers were shipped to Virginia to work as indentured servants. Alongside Africans who also had been shipped in for work, these laborers, all of whom were called slave, found common cause. Together, as American historian Edmund S. Morgan recounts, they stole hogs, made love, ran away, and rebelled against their overlords. Their rebellion became a class war. As indentured servants, they simply ran away. The trouble began when the freedmen, namely persons without house or land, rebelled. And this is talking about Bacon's Rebellion, which I recommend you research, and I'll be sending a podcast that kind of talks more about this. Led by a well-born Englishman named Nathaniel Bacon, the freedmen first slaughtered Indians and then turned their guns to the ruling elite. Bacon's 1676 rebellion did not end before Jamestown was burned to the ground and Bacon died. Last to surrender was a group of 80 African slaves and 20 English servants. The colony's most successful and powerful men went on alert. The allegiance between workers of all colors was deemed a threat. So Virginia's governing body broke up with this pervasive class allegiance by creating a new racial classification system that gave European indentured servants and wage earners white privilege. Until then, class prejudice was difficult to distinguish from race prejudice because the indentured servants of all colors were treated as members of the same race, the poor. So we're not going to go fully into class politics here, but I want to acknowledge this, and this is from a blog by Reverend Tandika, and a lot of the things that I'm reading today are compiled in a resources section that I'm going to send out as well when I send out the replay. But I want to acknowledge that there was once solidarity, and even within the Black Panther movement of the 1960s and 70s in Chicago, there were poor white Southerners who had moved north who were mobilized and worked alongside the Black Panthers. White Panthers, oh my God. I'm sorry, that's silly. And yeah, and of course they were all killed and taken out. But and that's how serious the energy of white supremacy is that when we start to have solidarity, it gets crushed by us or by some version of us who is situated in an institution that shrouds them in other kinds of privileges over life and death of bodies of people. Okay, so we're going to talk now about whiteness as an orientation. And this is a really interesting take on whiteness, and it's described by the scholar named Sarah Ahmed. So she's not white herself. And again, this is the irony of whiteness, is that it's sometimes most accurately viewed by non-white people. And again, there's a reason for that, because if we really got it, perhaps we wouldn't be consenting to it so blindly, right? So Sarah Ahmed says this in her paper on the phenomenology of whiteness. Whiteness could be described as an ongoing and unfinished history, which orientates bodies in specific directions, affecting how they take up space. The starting point for orientation is the point from which the world unfolds, the here of the body and the where of its dwelling. So I want you to think about your body right now as a white body, and think of the here as your body, the here of your body and the where of its dwelling. Think about your body and the spaces that your body has been in, and where whiteness is evidenced in that. So we've already established that in our bodies, we're feeling the responses of white supremacy and whiteness in the form of inertia, in the form of shame, in the form of, again, that feeling threatened and outnumbered. And again, like within that being threatened and outnumbered is the acknowledgement that they know how I really am. They know that I'm not a perfect savior. They know that I'm the barbarian and not them. That's why you would want to silence them. That's why you would want to lynch them. That's why you'd want to rape them, right? Not saying you personally, Lord knows, but I'm saying, like, look at this. Like, it is a big, real thing, okay? Like, the projection of trauma, of the here of the body and the space it takes up, has been put on other bodies, creating otherness, creating the exclusion factor, right? And so Resmaa Menakem says white supremacy and all the claims, accusations, excuses, and dodges that surround it are a trauma response. This response lives not inside psyches, but deep within bodies. In fact, a more accurate term for the affliction is white body supremacy, since it elevates the white body above all other bodies. The white body is ostensibly supreme standard against which other human bodies, humanity is measured. The attitudes, convictions, and beliefs of white body supremacy are reflexive cognitive side effects. And it's so funny because when I think about my own trauma, just of this personal lifetime, there were so many times where my brain was like, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. Trauma is real. The body and the brain are often at odds. And again, when you've been socialized and acculturated to disembodiment and extraction, not having reciprocal relationships with the earth or with people, then your psyche becomes even more and more fragile and even more able to be manipulated by these unconscious responses. So again, the attitudes, convictions, and beliefs of white body supremacy are reflexive cognitive side effects, like the belief of a claustrophobe that the walls are closing in. That is such a good comparison, again, to the white colonizer in the early days, seeing, Black enslaved people and Native people on either side closing in on them, when in fact that wasn't actually happening. But that's what created our identity. Like, that's why you and I check off the box white. That's why during World War II, my grandfather came back from the war and got the GI Bill, and the Black soldiers that fought alongside him did not. That's why in Philadelphia, my family, even though they came from poor Irish stock, were able to buy a house. And my best friend, her families were redlined in what they could buy, right? And what they could hope to have, also being afforded the worst jobs post-slavery, right? So, like, this is the legacy of that. I have to be in relationship with that. So it's the belief of a claustrophobe that the walls are closing in. These ideas have been reinforced through institutions. Again, so it's not all personal. We're here to talk about the personal spiritual practice, but like part of like why humility and tenderness and why we did work in our heart before we started this is because a lot of this is so much bigger than you. And it is not your personal responsibility to fix it all. It's not possible. That's some white saviorism bullshit anyway. What Black people need from us, non-Black people of color, and Indigenous people need from us, they don't need us to be overwhelmed and stressed out and it's all about me and I'm saving the world. I'm not trying to largely speak for them, but what I hear is a lot of them saying, y'all need to deal with your shit. Okay. So that's why I created this. That's why we're here. That's one small piece of it. So again, these ideas are reinforced through institutions as practice, procedures, and standards. And then again, like the history of this country gets told through the lens of white supremacy, right? And so, it's important for us to look at that. And so this is a important thing to also consider. And Sarah Ahmed says this in her essay: white bodies are habitual insofar that they trail behind actions. I really want you to take this in. They do not get stressed in their encounters with objects or others as their whiteness goes unnoticed. So if we use that claustrophobe thing, and if we use the fear of I'm afraid because I'm the only white person in the scenario, then you can kind of imagine why, again, you're outnumbered, you just colonized this land. Well, now I'm going to make these spaces fully white so that I don't have to think about the mirror, because if I see a Black person, whether that's the colonizer back then or the white person now who hasn't done any emotional labor around their programming, they represent to me a history that I don't understand. And I'm seeing them in a space that I thought was supposed to make it so that I don't have to notice my whiteness. I'm stressed, right? Okay. So white spaces and white bodies trail behind. So again, because of the way that things have been made into whiteness, or whiteness has been kind of inundated and it pervades all these environments, white people don't notice their whiteness. And it's also how they could take certain actions and not have any idea that the action they were taking at the time was rooted in whiteness or racism or white supremacy, which is all a result of the creation of whiteness, right? Like, absolutely, it trails behind. And so the person who's being otherized, let's say the indigenous person, they're being put into, like, they're the object that's being observed, right? And this is where fetishization comes in, right? And again, this is where that manipulation of safety. So we're always being told by the ruling powers what's safe and what's not safe. And then maybe we'll say that this fetishized body is not safe, and maybe we're sexually excited by that. Or our dad would be mad if we dated this person. And this is also how white womanhood is a perfect weapon for white supremacy, because it within the realm of patriarchy, it also represents this subversive force of, again, being oppressor and oppressed. And this is also where the whole idea of white innocence, I think it really lives in the guise of white womanhood. And if we acknowledge the fact that Breonna Taylor's murderers there was a miscarriage of justice for her murder the same day, 65 years after Emmett Till's killers were acquitted. We can see that the ancestral energy is coming through. We can see that white womanhood and white innocence at large is being put into question. And, you know, the idea that the officer who shot and killed Breonna Taylor was charged for the bullets that missed, was charged for the bullets that damaged property, and not for the bullets that actually shot and killed a young woman in her bed. If you can't see those layers of psychosis and how, because whiteness trails behind, we build institutions that continue to distance it from our vision. And we can't physically turn our heads all the way back, right? It's not up to us to do that. It's up to us to bring it forward. And once we do that, we can start to see these things a little more clearly. And so, as many have argued, she says, whiteness is invisible and unmarked as the absent center. Oh, actually, sorry, I want to get this part. Whiteness would be what lags behind. White bodies do not have to face their whiteness. They are not orientated towards it. So that's a really interesting thing to kind of acknowledge, is that, like, spaces and other people have to be orientated towards whiteness, but white people aren't orientated towards whiteness. It's so clever, right? And this nut is what allows whiteness to cohere as that which bodies are orientated around. When bodies lag behind, then they extend their reach. So it's the idea that whiteness is almost an extension of the white body. So then the white body, again, like we can look at the police, right? We can look at the white body as an extension and an institution of protecting, quote unquote, I'm not saying that they don't protect sometimes, but on a larger scale of manipulating the sense of white body presence and safety as it relates to the policing of Black people and brown bodies, right? So as we've argued, whiteness is invisible and unmarked as the absent center against which others appear as deviants or points of deviation. Whiteness is only invisible for those who inhabit it, or those who get so used to its inhabitants that they learn not to see it even when they are not it. Spaces are oriented around whiteness insofar as whiteness is not seen. We do not face whiteness. It trails behind bodies as what is assumed to be given. And this is important to remember. Whiteness is not reducible to white skin or even to something we can have or be, even if we pass through whiteness. When we talk about a sea of whiteness or white space, we're talking about the repetition of the passing by of some bodies and not others. But non-white bodies do inhabit white spaces, we know this. Such bodies are made invisible when we see spaces as being white, at the same time as they become hypervisible when they do not pass, which means they stand out or stand apart. So this also kind of talks about whether you're in a white space or a non-white space and what that means for you and your body as a white person. You learn to fade into the background. This would be a non-white person. So it's the idea that within whiteness, even if we're not doing anything as white people, most of the spaces that we're inhabiting are white spaces. And within the energy of that lags behind and that permeates beyond whiteness, there's a way in which Black people and people of color have had to learn to comport within whiteness, right? In order to make sure they don't get lynched or make sure that they're less threatening so they don't get pulled over by the police, right? This is a conversation that's coming back up to be talked about. And so what's been, and so, you know, I even think about like, you know, the presidency of Barack Obama being followed by the presidency of Trump. White people, many of them voted for Barack Obama, but they didn't understand, I don't think, that the psychic overload for the majority of white Americans of seeing a Black person out of their space, seeing a Black person in the White House. And I don't think a lot of white folks are even conscious of that. So I'm not saying that that's what they were consciously thinking, but it's like, again, it trails behind. It's like people thought the 2016 election, and I'm not here to get into politics, I'm just using it as an example. People thought the 2016 election was like a no-brainer, but whiteness trails behind itself. And it's sometimes not seen that these folks were calling themselves the silent majority. And why were they silent? For the same reason that you would feel scared to be alone amongst some Black folks, because they know that there's an implication in what they're doing. And they have not taken the time to reckon with that in their hearts and their bodies. And so everybody else gets to be blamed for what they don't have, right?